Welcome everyone to the CBI webinar African Spices, Seizing the Opportunities in Europe. I will start with some of the house rules. We cannot see or hear you, so there's in the menu there's a questions tab. You can write your questions there. We'll answer a selection of questions, and if we have enough time, we'll answer all the questions. There will be a recording of this session. It will be published on our website and on the CBI YouTube channel, so you can always watch it later again, or watch it or share it with other people. And we'll ask you to complete a short survey about our webinar at the end. Okay. So it's the webinar about African spices and the opportunities, and for that we have some speakers, experts in the spice and herbs business. We have today speaking Luz Maria Barrientos from Globally Cool. She's an international trade consultant, and we'll start off the presentation. Then we have our expert Paul Wiertsema, who has his company Spice and Advice, and he will tell also has a part of the presentation. And we have Paul Rooij, who's a food technologist and also a trader in spices, and he will share his experiences with trading in Africa. So this is the agenda. I will start off with a short introduction about CBI, and then Luz will talk about the European markets for African spice and herbs with all the statistics about the main trades. And Paul will talk about the key success factors for African spices to enter the European market. And Paul will share his insights about trading with in the African spice market. And we will end this presentation with a question and answer. So please, during the whole webinar, you can ask your questions in this questions tab, and at the end we will answer them together. And it will take about an hour and 15 minutes today. So please keep with us. I will start off with CBI. CBI is the Center for the Promotion of Imports from Developing Countries. We are part of the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, and we are fully funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. It's our mission to support the transitions towards inclusive and sustainable economies. So we strengthen the social, economic, and environmental sustainability of small, medium enterprises in developing countries, especially by connecting them to European and regional markets. So we promote and create decent jobs, and we pay special attention to women and youth, and we stimulate sustainable production and trade. CBI can work in a selection of countries. Our Ministry of Foreign Affairs decides about the countries we can work in. It's based on the policy. And nowadays we mainly work in African countries and a bit in Asia. These are in total about 24 countries. And we are active in 14 sectors at the moment. Of course, today it's about herbs and spices. And our latest sector is the honey sector. There are still only a few studies there, but we'll keep expanding that. CBI has two main pillars. One is the CBI projects. These are 4-year expert coaching programs with individual training, coaching, and market entry activities. And with our projects, we focus on sustainable production and exports as a means to create decent jobs. It's always it's 4-year programs, so it's for the long-term sector development as well. So we work with SMEs, but also with the business sector organizations, universities, and other sector organizations. At the moment, we have a spices project in Ethiopia and a ginger project in Nigeria. You can check at our website cbi.eu/projects for more information. The next important pillar is our market information. On our website, you have the website here, cbi.eu/market information. We offer a very large amount of studies about the market, but also specific product studies, which tell you how to give you tips how to export to Europe. It's easy to access on our website, and so we answer questions such as which countries offer the most opportunities, what channels should you use to enter the market, and what laws and requirements must you follow to enter the European market. So if we have time at the end, maybe I'll go with you to the website and show you some more. But for now, I invite you to visit our website after this webinar and check out if there is interesting information for you. Okay, I will now pass it over to Luz again for starting the presentation about the opportunities for African spices. So I'm going to make Luz the presenter now. Yes.
There you go. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thomas, can you confirm if you can see my screen?
I can confirm. I can see your screen, Luz.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Thomas, for the introduction. As Thomas was saying, my name is Luz Maria Barrientos. I work at Globally Cool as an international trade consultant, and we consult, coach, and connect companies and business support organizations on their way to internationalization. And we've been working very hard with the CBI to identify relevant information and opportunities for companies looking to export spices and herbs to the European market. So I also invite you to take a look at the website on the CBI. We are creating really interesting and insightful reports that will be very helpful for you to understand the markets a little bit better. But just to kickstart the presentation for today, let's start talking about the European market for African spices and herbs. So let's start defining a little bit where these opportunities for African spices are coming from. And as you know, the European market is been demanding a lot of spices for a very long time, so we do have a steady demand here in Europe. But the supply chain of these spices has been destabilized, let's say. It's changing, it has been disrupted in the last years by several factors. For example, you have shipping issues like the obstruction of the Red Sea that has been causing delays and extra supply costs. And this is, of course, driving European companies to think, where else can we source our spices from? We also have the issue, the very big issue that key producing countries, for example, Indonesia, India, or China, they are increasing their own consumption faster than the production, meaning they have less spices that they can put in the international market. That means importers from all over the world, including Europe, might be standing empty-handed or will not be able to source all the spices needed. And that, of course, is driving them to look for alternative origins to mitigate that risk. And on top of that, we also have climate change. As you might know, this has been affecting crops around the world, and that, of course, includes spices and herbs. So it is another factor that creates more risk in the supply chain. And this is opening opportunities for new origins. And of course, Africa can also participate from these opportunities. On the one hand, many African countries have good climate conditions for growing spices, so it's an opportunity to start entering into that market and to fill these gaps that are appearing in the European market. And also it's a little bit more geographically nearer than, let's say, other countries like India and Indonesia. So it could be also an alternative to mitigate the risk of shipping issues. So this is a little bit of the context of these opportunities for African origins. And as we can see here, these are not only theoretical opportunities, their trade is taking place. In the last 5 years, we see an increase in 6% every year, which is a good development. And we estimate that in 2023, the European imports of spices and herbs coming from Africa was a little bit more than 30,000 tons, which accounts for around 6% of the total imports from Europe. So we are growing, the opportunities are materializing, but Africa is still a small participant with a small share in the whole, in the total of the imports, which is good news because it means we have a lot of chances to grow. Now, let's take a little bit a deeper look into which spices are growing the most. And we can see that capsicums is definitely the biggest, the most representative spice, has been growing the most. Especially in 2023, we see a peak and it reaches over 11,000 tons, that more than 1/3 of the total exports of Africa to Europe. So we can see a big opportunity here, a big peak. Then we have ginger, which is, usually ginger is the most imported spice in Europe, so it's not surprising that we have it on a second place. But we can see here that the exports or the imports from Africa decreased in the last year, and if I'm not mistaken, that has to do with a ginger crisis in Nigeria, if I'm not mistaken. So mold and bacteria that affected the production. So it's not an issue of the demand, it was an issue of supply. Then we have anise, which is coming mainly from Egypt, had a little decrease, but it's more or less stable in the last 5 years. Then we also have cinnamon, which has also been experienced a little bit of fluctuation. Then we have the cloves, which was growing the first 4 years steadily and then experienced a little decline in 2023. Coriander seeds, mainly from Morocco, looking relatively stable with a little decline in 2023. Pepper, also small fluctuations, and vanilla, which is, as you know, a key spice traded in Europe, had a little decline, which had to do with some minimum prices that were established in Madagascar. So some importers in Europe shift the sourcing from Madagascar to other origins. Now, if we take a look at the importers in Europe, we can see that Spain was the main importer in 2023, and it shows a peak that quite relates to the peak that we saw in capsicum. And this is because they are related. Spain was the main importer of capsicum from Africa and explain this peak that we can see here. Then we have Germany as a second importer, and Germany imports ginger the most. And we can also see the decrease that we saw in the last slide when we saw that ginger decreased 2023. This decrease, you can see reflected here in the statistics for Germany. Then we have the UK, which is showing a nice steady growth. Afterwards, in the 4th place, we have France, which had higher imports in 2019, dropped a little bit in 2020, and then it was stable 2 years to drop a little bit. So we see some fluctuation there, which could also have a lot to do with these minimum prices that I was referring to in the last slide from Madagascar. And then we have the Netherlands with also some fluctuations. But also very important to say here is that Spain in this case was not only the biggest importer in Europe, it was in 2023 the biggest importer of spices from Africa in the world. So this is how meaningful this peak is. It became in 2023 the main importer. Germany is the fourth main importer in the world of African spices. So it's not only the second in Europe, it's the fourth biggest importer of Africa spices in the world. And then this top 5 that we have here also belongs to the top 10 importing countries in the world, meaning that Europe is for sure a very, very important destination for African spices. And it makes a lot of sense to emphasize in this market and to try to enter it because it is offering or is already showing fruits, not only theoretical opportunities, right? If we take a look at the countries from Africa that are exporting the most, we can see that Zambia was for sure the biggest exporter. And again, we see it's the same, the same development. We saw the capsicum, then we saw Spain, and now we see Zambia. They are all connected. Zambia is exporting the most capsicum to Europe, and that is to Spain. So we can see it's a relatively young origin, but it's already being very successful. Then we have Egypt, which is exporting mainly anise seeds, and it's relatively stable. Then we have Madagascar with vanilla, but also cloves. And as we were saying before, this decline has a lot to do with the minimum export prices that were set in Madagascar for the vanilla, and that drove buyers to look for other origins. Then we have Nigeria, basically meat with ginger, and this decrease, as I was telling before, had to do with this issues in the crops. And afterwards we have Morocco, which a very steady supply of mainly coriander seeds. And also, if we take a look at this slide, we see that Zambia is exporting 90% of their spices to Europe. So they are very much focused, especially on the Spanish market. But in the case of the other origins, there is a lot of room for growth. So Egypt, for example, is only exporting 28% of the spices to Europe. So there is a big opportunity here to expand into the European market, and from the other side, for buyers to find suppliers in Egypt. And Madagascar has over the half is exporting to Europe, so it's a little bit more, they are more concentrated in Europe. But Nigeria has the same situation, only 24. So there is a lot of room for growth in Nigeria, and the same is for Morocco. So what we can see here is a lot of opportunities for growth in the European market. But to seize these opportunities, exporters need to be prepared for the European market. So now I would like to ask my colleague Paul to take over and walk us through the key success factors for African spices to enter the European market.
Just say something before we go on to the audience, also the audience who missed the introduction. You can ask your questions in the tab via the questions pane. So just write your questions there, we'll answer them at the end. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Paul, for this interruption.
No, thank you very much, Thomas. Luz, thank you very much for your presentation. And I'd like to continue with you to share with you what are, in my opinion, the key success factors for African spice SMEs to enter the European market. I have been working in the spice industry already 20 years, 16 years as a strategic buyer at Intertaste and Royal Aroma. And the last 4 years, I'm active as a spice consultant, giving advice to companies and organizations. Luz, next slide, please. So, in my opinion, we should look at 4 points which are of interest. comply with the EU quality regulations, embrace sustainability, invest in market development, and adopt customer needs. So in the next 10 minutes, I like to share with you my experience about what's important concerning these 4 topics. Next slide, please. Comply with the EU regulations. This is immediately very important because when you are not complying with the European legislation, your product cannot enter the European market. Please be aware, this is very important and very strict. What are the main hazards in spices and herbs according to my experience? Residues of agrochemicals, looking at fungicides, looking at pesticides, insecticides, all kinds of residues. They create a maximum, or they create some residues, and these residues will all have maximum residue levels in the European Union. And you talk about ppbs, parts per billion. And in spices and herbs, you have to consider that there can be up to 700, 800 different pesticide residues for which there is legislation in the European market. And that's controlled by the EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority. Besides pesticides residues, microbiological hazards like salmonella, particularly in a product like black pepper can happen, but also other spices. Mycotoxins, aflatoxin and ochratoxin levels, particularly in ginger and in nutmeg, that can be an issue. Has to do also with poor post-harvest practices, so product has to be dried very carefully. Authenticity, food fraud is still an issue, and whenever you add something to your spice or whenever there is allergen involved in your production, you should declare this and talk to your customer about it. Be open about it. It's very important because otherwise it can run into major trouble with the food authorities. And last but not least, food approved packaging and correct labeling is important. Next slide, please. So how do you control these hazards? A quality assurance system, in my opinion, is really a must, and for companies who want to sell to the European market. You have IFS, International Food Standards, you have SFSSC, you have BRC. There are different standards which can be implemented to control your hazards in the whole supply chain. And whenever you ship to Europe, pre-shipment testing of a representative sample is very important. Before you ship it, ask a laboratory or ask your customer to find an accredited laboratory where you send your sample to test it and to ask for a certificate of analysis proving that your product is in compliance with the EU limits, as I just explained. This is very important because spices are considered a high-risk food product in the European market, and food authorities, they test quite often based on an analysis of risk. They might test 1 out of 3 containers or 1 out of 6 containers, but in many European ports, the food authorities will take samples out of your container and test it if it's according to the European legislation. And if not, you get a report in the rapid alert system, which is obliged as well by authorities as companies to report there all kinds of discrepancies with the regulations. This RESEF portal is a public portal where every company and every consumer can see what's happening. And please be aware, you don't want to be in there because it's a kind of blacklist for spices or all for food and food products and from different origins. All details are in there, who shipped it and what was wrong with it. Okay, next slide, please. Embrace sustainability. Pay attention that most European companies have a sustainability policy or require certain sustainability standards based on the SDGs, the Social Development Goals of the United Nations. Probably you have heard of them. but you can find a lot of information about them. And recently, also the EU Green Deal has been accepted, which also means that organic farming and the reduction of pesticides, deforestations, all kinds of goals are set to improve the environment. So my advice is ask your potential European customer what he needs concerning sustainability certification or sustainability standards, because some customers, like for instance, Unilever is a good example, have their own standard and they will implement that to their suppliers in the whole supply chain to make sure that the end product they received is sustainable according to their standards. Of course, you can also join the Sustainable Spice Initiative, which is a platform for suppliers from and producers of spices, but also from processors, where all kinds of standards are compared with each other, and where you can look which standard best fits for your organization to comply with. Next slide, please. Invest in market development. Like Loes mentioned already, risk mitigation is becoming a very big issue for buyers of spices in Europe. They don't look only at Asia anymore. They will also have to look at Africa, and Africa has many opportunities. But this also means that you have to become attractive for these buyers and make sure your website shows that you are compliant with the European regulations, and that you can send products to Europe which are suitable for the European market. And the best way to find out and to investigate your opportunities, in my opinion, is to attend to the European food fairs. There are some very big fairs, like the Anuga, and you see a picture here of a CBI booth at the Anuga in 2023, where they are promoting ginger from Nigeria. But there are also the BioVag. There's also the BioVag for organic products. There is the food ingredient exhibition for spice ingredients and other ingredients. And there is the Cial in Paris, in France. Also, these 4 big food exhibitions can be quite interesting to attend, to find out who is your competition, what is the demand, what is of interest, and what are the trends. And whenever you have located a potential customer, I always tell people to invite them to Africa, show them your facility, and build up a relation, a transparent relation, to create a win-win and improve your competitive position in the market. Next slide, please. Adapt to customer needs, adopt to European customer needs, because they can be different than from other continents, and they are. And first of all, you have to make sure what kind of quality assurance they need, what kind of certifications they need. And secondly, you have to find out what is exactly the product they need. So ask for the product specifications. In many cases, they have a product specification which shows exactly the details of the product application. How should the spice look like? What quality is important to them? Should it be a powder? Should it be a whole spice? What moisture content? What is the volatile oil content they need? It can be customer specific, and it's very important to look at these product specifications before you send a sample. It doesn't make sense to send a sample unless it's a totally new product, of course. But it doesn't make sense for an existing product to send a sample to a European buyer which doesn't comply with the product specification, because this European buyer is going to do tests on it and spend a lot of time to get your product approved in all kinds of different applications. Please note, this is costing companies in Europe a lot of time and money to test your sample. And when it's not according to the required product specification, it doesn't make sense to test it, because often you get only one opportunity. Next slide, please. So EU buyers do not switch overnight from one supplier to another supplier. It's a very traditional market, and once they have a reliable supplier, they will not shift easy. So it can take quite some time before you get approved as a new supplier. Please note, this can take half a year and can maybe take up to 1 year. So you really have to be patient and believe in it, that it will start. That's very important. Prepayment is not customary. I know a lot of suppliers from Africa like to have prepayment, and Paul de Rooij, the next presenter, will also tell a little bit more about this issue. But in the spice trade, cash against documents, so payment after the container arrives in the European harbor, that's the most common practice, what's happening at the moment. Once you have identified potential customers and who come to visit you, look at efficiency in the supply chain. What can you do to create a win-win? Maybe you can grind in origin instead of in Europe. Maybe you can make a special quality for your customer. Maybe you can make a special packaging, because it's very important to differentiate yourself from the competition and to build a good relation with your customer. Be flexible in your product portfolio. That means also looking at trends. In particularly after the Corona crisis, the health food for some spices, it has boosted the imports to Europe, like ginger and turmeric. They really increased in different kinds of health food applications, and this could be a very nice niche market also to enter. Together with your European customers to look at this is very important. So sharing market intelligence is key and is absolutely needed to establish a long-term cooperation. Last but not least, I'd like to invite you all to visit the food ingredient exhibition in Frankfurt, which is in November this year. And on this exhibition, it's a very nice example for starting spice exports to Europe from Africa. The Tanzanian suppliers will have their booth together to enter and to present their spices and herbs to the European market for the first time. Thank you very much for your attention. And when you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will have a look at it, and I will give the floor to back to Loes and Paul de Rooij.
Good morning, all. Thank you for attending this seminar. I'm Paul de Rooij. I'm 30 years in the spice business. Started as a food technologist. Later on, I moved into the international trade. And since 2008, I'm running my own company where I did an investment in Sri Lanka for 5 years. Where I started a company in spices, stepped out of that in 2019, and in late 2019, I decided to invest in Tanzania to set up a spice factory there. Next slide, please. I'd like to focus with the total audience on the financial constraints in this business. The majority of the exporters like to do business, but the buyers like to buy big uniform lots. And I think that is the biggest issue in this business. Wherever you're trading from in Africa, the buyer will ask for a full container load of one single product of one specific quality. That means you have to buy the raw materials, you have to do the processing, you get a processing loss, and during the processing and collection time, all that period has to be financed. Then you prepare the goods for shipment with the current shipment issues and congestion in all the ports and disruption in the Red Sea area. It means that you probably have to wait 2 to 3 weeks to get a container on board. Then you need to wait for the paperwork. And if you are lucky and you can get documents, it means that by then 2 to 3 months have passed. What does it mean for you? Can you finance 3 months the goods you are selling? Do you have an own capital? And do you start from the source, from the farm? Or do you work with a cooperative or a middleman? It has a big impact on your business. During the collection period, it could be that the prices are changing. And changing prices can go up and down, but you have a fixed price with the customer on supply. So can you adopt part of a market fluctuation and still make a profit? The next step is processing. If you start processing any product, whatever you do, you might have to do additional drying. It costs time, it costs labor, it costs product weight, which is a loss. And you might have to upgrade to a certain standard. For example, pepper is traded in different densities. So if you produce out of a standard lot an upgraded lot, you get byproduct, and that is not necessarily a loss, but it is only paid when you sell it as well. So you might need 30–40% more raw material than what you're selling against a certain contract. Packing and labor. The packing material is most of the time a bag. And what we need in Europe is a packing material which complies to the EU regulation. It means it should be food grade. And that means that there's no allowed substance on the inside of the packing material which can migrate into the product. Another thing is that you are never allowed to put any product in a second-hand bag, because you don't know what has been in the bag. And even if you think it is washed and cleaned and the bag is looking perfect, it can still contaminate the product. The time spent between signing a contract and the final payment, for the small entrepreneurs, it is always interesting to look at the final price at destination. The thing is that if you look at the whole chain, the value chain, it might take up to 6 months today before you get final payment. And in the meantime, you have financed a full container lot. And from Tanzania, we are specifically trading pepper, cardamom, clove, and cinnamon. And a container load easily exceeds today $150,000. Where do you get that money from? And if you do one container and you have pending expenditures over the months, fixed expenditures, you basically have to ship every month one container to cover those expenses. That means you need a huge amount of capital. And that is for most exporters not a workable situation. So what could be the solution? To mitigate the financial risks and constraints, it is interesting to investigate and to invest in a working value chain, meaning try to get farmers organized in cooperatives or farmer groups. They can bring together a certain volume in a short time, and the buyer or the middleman can buy then a big volume in one go, meaning that there's no risk of a market fluctuation between time of selling and time of buying. And if there's a middleman can also help to a processor, exporter, to bring in a bigger volume in one go. If the value chain is working, and that is what we see in the most effective spice countries like Sri Lanka, India, Vietnam, Indonesia. In all these countries, there is a working value chain, and each partner in the value chain is making a living. There are hardly any company who have his own plantations where they cover the whole supply chain, because there's also a big risk involved, because there's no way to control climate or climate change. So they always rely on partners in the value chain and honor the contracts between each other, and you can build up a good living in this business. Spices are interesting, but there's also a big issue on imports. And maybe next slide, please. The quality risks. Paul Wiertsma already mentioned it, and I'd like to emphasize more about the quality risks. We are in Europe and also in the States very critical on authenticity, but also contamination of very low levels. Even though you know you never used a chemical on a product, we sometimes find residues, very low level of residues, which makes the product not allowed to enter Europe. Where does it come from? That can come from, like I said, reused bags from feed or chemicals, which basically contaminate on a very low level, not to be seen by the eye, the product which is transported to a processing factory. Even hand picking can contaminate the product. We ourselves had a problem where the people contaminated hand-picked product because they didn't wash their hands properly, and the contamination came from the mosquito nets used in the villages to protect the people during the night against mosquito. And the contaminant permethrin is a chemical substance which is on the mosquito net. The net is impregnated, and just by opening or getting out of bed and cleaning up that room, the hands of the people who are doing the hand picking was contaminating eventually the product, which didn't make it allowed to enter Europe. That is something you don't expect. So by the time you eventually produce all the product, and you do an analysis before shipment, you find that the product doesn't comply. You have invested all your money in the product, you cannot perform and have to say no to your customer, and you have a lot which you have to sell somewhere else where this contaminant is not a big issue. So it is something to be aware of when you do enter the food supply chain, that you are aware of all the risks. And if you don't know, try to talk to the people in the supply chain. What is allowed? Where are the risks? And what can you do? Then market fluctuations. If you sell to a European or American country, to a buyer there, they expect you to honor the market or the contract. And sometimes if you sell something at a price, by the time you are collecting the product, the prices go up or availability disappears because there are other people in the market buying the same product. And at the end of the day, you might have to say, sorry, I can't do the contract. That gives you a very bad reputation, and you will never get a second chance, or not easily a second chance, to do business. Shipping costs. In the last year, we have faced increased shipping costs from African, especially the East African market, because of the issues in the Red Sea. The majority of the shipping lines are asking more money because the transit time to Europe is longer. So the vessels take more time and they have to be paid. Rejection of non-compliance. Goods will always be retested before they enter the final destination, because the importer is liable for the intrinsic food quality as a first importer, and they can get a big claim if they bring into consumption product which doesn't comply to EU law. So they will do thorough testing, and they will reject and reship the goods and ask for compensation from a shipper. So think before you guarantee what you can do, if you really are able to control it. And if there's a non-compliance, don't try to hide, try together, find an alternative destination, maybe at a discounted price, to save as much as possible of the value of the product. Next slide, please. So to summarize, if you sell your product, really try to understand what you are selling and talk to the buyers if you don't know what they mean. Don't think you need to know all, but be honest on what you can do, but also what you can't do, because then they know the risk and then they can make a decision. A certified quality system helps you to identify and help you to get an idea where are you in controlling all the risks. It helps you to pinpoint risks. So are there rodents in the building? Yeah, then you have you need to create a rodent plan that they cannot enter the building or cannot enter the product. Are your premises food safe? So is there glass in a factory? People in Europe don't want glass in the factories. Your personnel, is it using any medication or hand cream on skin which can contaminate a product? Is your process safe? Are all the steps taken to avoid any contamination? A next step higher up in the quality chain is organic certification. If you want to do organic certification, you need an organic supply base. Be aware that organic is traded at higher level, but there's no acceptance of any contamination of chemicals. Stones or twigs or that kind of things can be re-cleaned in Europe, but chemicals cannot be removed, and any chemical can ruin the organic status of a product, giving it a loss value of 30 to 50%. Then sustainability. Today it is a big topic, and the legislation is getting stricter and stricter all the time. In today's market, we as importers in Europe have to guarantee that any product entering Europe is not coming from land which has been cleared from any trees in the last 3 years. that means that it is not possible to clear a forest or a land where there's trees on it to grow a monocrop. So try to protect environment and see what you can do in existing land if you want to expand farms. I think the sustainability chances, especially for African countries, is a huge advantage and opportunity to enter markets, because basically we can say that the countries in Africa are clean and fairly empty compared to the Asian countries or the European countries. The population density is less, so the air pollution is less, the use of chemicals is maybe concentrated in certain areas, so there is definitely space to grow clean and high value spices. And if Africa is concentrating on that, they are slowly getting already a reputation of a source of clean products, and investment today in this spice development will definitely pay off in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So now we go to the questions and answers. Loes, you can stop sharing the presentation. So and then if Paul as well as Paul and Loes will share their webcam, the camera, then we can start answering the questions. We got some interesting questions. So, and then the first question I would like to ask you is, the question is there an analysis needed for spices sent in bulk or also for individual packaging, but for packaging of 50 grams, for example? Maybe Paul talked a lot about the analysis. Can you answer that?
Yeah, well, bulk packing and retail packing require the same analysis. Doing retail packing in Africa is a big is a risk, because you have to control all the quality parameters in Africa. So if you do it, you have to prove that before you pack it in retail product bags or jars or whatever, that you control everything, the microbiology, the chemicals, the composition. If you do grinding, you need to be sure that there's no metal fractions after grinding in product. So it is tricky to enter with a retail product the European market. I would advise people first to start with the raw materials, working with a European partner, and slowly move into retail afterwards if they know that they can control the bulk product itself.
Good advice, Paul. Thank you. During the presentation of Loes, you got some questions about the opportunities as well. I don't know if you have all the statistics in your head, Loes, but there's a question: what's the prospects for Uganda in spices?
Oh.
I would understand if you don't know that exactly now, but
Yes, I might answer maybe another question, and then while my colleagues maybe are answering, I can take a look at Uganda, because I don't have in my mind right now what is going on.
okay.
Although maybe Paul, if you have any insights about Uganda.
Yeah, well, I know something about Uganda. They are doing capsicums various types, and they are successful there. And they also grow quite a good quality vanilla beans. So for these products, there's definitely a market if they can guarantee a stable product and a stable supply.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at the statistics right now, and what I see is it grew. I mean, if you take a look at 2019, Uganda was only exporting 279 tons, and now in 2023 we have 614 tons. So there is an interesting growth there. It's going mainly to Spain, capsicums, as Paul was saying. Also a good quantity going to Germany, and then to the Netherlands. So we can see it is still a small origin, but it's been growing.
Okay, thank you, Luz. And you also talked about that Zambia is a very important exporter to Europe. Do you also know what the main spices are that are imported from Zambia?
Capsicum. Actually, at the beginning of the presentation, maybe you recall we saw a peak in the capsicum imports from Africa. We saw the same peak in the capsicum imports from Spain, and exactly the same one for Zambia. So this is all basically mainly these imports from Spain coming from Zambia of capsicum. That's the main spice.
Okay, thank you.
May I add something?
Yes, please, Paul.
Yes, the capsicums is indeed particularly of interest because China has been the main source for capsicum and still is for capsicum. But there are a lot of issues about, also mentioned in Luz, her introduction, of capsicums in China. First of all, with pesticides, and secondly, with politics, has to do with the Uyghurs in that area where there are some political issues, and also the consumption of capsicums in China is increasing quite a lot, so there is less available for export. So it's really an excellent example where Africa jumps into the opportunity to supply Europe with the needed capsicums.
Okay, thank you.
I like to
please.
add on that the capsicum group can be split up in two big groups. That is the hot chilies and the sweet capsicums used for paprika powder. And already back in the 90s, South Africa and Zambia were doing big quantities of sweet paprika growing for the Spanish processors, which are basically the world's biggest sweet paprika suppliers in the world. And that is why Spain is such an interesting country. They normally grow on contract conditions huge quantity of capsicums, sweet paprika. Heat units less than 400 for the paprika production for the whole of Europe and partly for the States. So there's a big opportunity also in other countries where they can grow these capsicums for the market. And like Paul said, there's a lot of issues because they use in China all kind of hormones or chemicals which are not allowed in Europe, and they can create big problems because China is now basically supplying 80% of the world demand of capsicums for the sweet paprika production.
Okay, great opportunity. So that's good to hear. And we have two questions about herbs. So is it in demand in Europe? Like the chamomile, spearmint, peppermint, basil, and thyme. Can anyone?
Well, there is a demand. There is a demand. If we come back to like the main exporters in terms of herbs, we had Egypt exporting a lot of anise seeds, for example. But the truth is there is also some growth of that in Europe, right? Some of these herbs are also grown locally, and this is a very strong trend at the moment in Europe, which is the preference of locally grown ingredients. So it is to be expected that buyers will prefer local or European production of these types of herbs. Nevertheless, there's always a demand for other, for other origins, for risk mitigation, but also for extra demand that cannot be met in Europe. But certainly the local production and the preference of local produce is an issue in this sense.
So, to be clear, we're talking here about the dried herbs and the grounded herbs, and not specifically about the fresh herbs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Also.
Yeah.
Also,
I like to add on that in Egypt they have a reputation of growing big monocultures, and to keep these monocultures healthy, they tend to use quite a lot of chemicals, and that conflicts with the legislation in Europe, which makes it more and more difficult to import the herbs into Europe. So there is an opportunity for organic grown herbs because their chemicals are not allowed, but they have to keep in mind that if they turn normal land into organic land, it takes 3 years to grow a product on that land without any chemicals before you can go for organic certification. And on top of that, you have to keep in mind that you can grow your product organic, but if your neighbor is not doing organic business and is spraying his field, it could be drift from his chemicals on your land, destroying your crop. So you have to be really careful if you step into that business, and if you and you need to investigate if you can control those issues.
Okay. Good advice, thank you, Paul. So I would just like to add that for fresh herbs, we have a product, we have a study on our website within the fresh fruit and vegetables sector. So that's regarding the fresh herbs. But again, Luz already said, especially in fresh herbs, there's a lot of production in Europe itself as well. So let's go to and there's Natasha who has 3 questions, and I would like to ask them to Luz. What new opportunities are emerging for exporting African-grown spices? That's her first question.
All right. Well, in general, there are different opportunities that are opening for spices from everywhere. Let's start there. There is a very interesting demand, a very dynamic market in Europe in spices. On the one hand, you have people wanting to be a little bit more healthy in their food, and that and not using or not consuming too many chemicals or flavorings or colorings. And this is, of course, opening market for spices, and that is for consumption directly, like at home, for example, when you buy your spices and season your own food, but also in the food industry, because producers of food products are also more inclined to use the spices, to have a clean label, right? So there is a big opportunity there for spices in general, not only for Africa, but if you consider what we've been saying so far, the need for buyers to source from other origins, there you see how this opportunity impacts directly, the opportunities for Africa. Something that would be a little bit more directed to, let's say, the African market is the increase of interest in international cuisines. People, even on, disregard what origin they have, they are increasingly more interested in trying new cuisines, and that includes also African cuisines. So, for example, nowadays in the retail, you can see mixtures like Ras Al Hanout or Berber, Zatar, Duka, which are, Arab or North African mixtures, and you can see them now even in the discounters with their own private label. So that totally shows there is a very strong demand of this kind of mixtures. So that definitely impacts directly the export of these African flavors. There is also bird eye chili is growing a lot, coming a lot from Asia, but also can come from Africa, and you can see it even in the retails, both high level but also discounter in this premium packaging. So you see there is a growing interest in this spice. We also have this health trend that we have seen since the COVID, where you saw the imports of ginger spiked, you saw the turmeric also spiked, and even though this has stabilized a little bit, it is in another level than it used to be before, and that totally offers opportunities, for example, for ginger from Nigeria. But in the following months, I believe we're going to have a new trends document in the CBI website where you can see all of these new trends explained, and they definitely offer very interesting opportunities for African exporters.
Thank you, Loes. Yeah, you've already answered her other questions. So about that, the African cuisine is one of the trends behind the success and the growth of the sector. So yeah, thank you.
Thomas, maybe
yes.
I can add on top of that.
Yes.
Due to the last year climate conditions in many countries who are growing traditionally the spices, there were big issues on crops, and certain crops take 3 to 4 years to develop, and especially pepper and ginger. Ginger is a crop which can be grown in 1 year from seed to ready product. And the issue in Nigeria is a soil-borne disease, which will not disappear quickly. So other countries who can grow ginger, and that is basically the whole of Africa, as long as there's enough water resource, they can grow bigger quantities of ginger and take part of the market share. A product like pepper, there's a shortage on the world market. It takes 2 to 3 years to grow from a seedling to a mature plant. There is already pepper production in East Africa, and if they invest now on expanding production, there's definitely a space in the market for those products in the years to come, and prices will stay high. It is not that it will easily drop down because of overproduction. The demand issue and the supply issue is so big that it will take 5 to 7 years to recover from what happened last year. So there's definitely an opening in the market because of people looking for product.
Thank you, Paul. We have a question about whether the spices and herbs that European buyers buy, are they mostly used as an ingredient to process further in food products, or are they used as retail products?
Yeah, I don't have the exact figures, but the majority of spices and herbs is used in, let's say, retail products instead of sold as a single spice on the shelf in supermarkets. I think, Paul, correct me when I'm wrong, but I think it's about 80% which is used as an ingredient in all kinds of food products supplied to the consumers, and about 20% is sold in a bottle or mostly in a bottle in the retail as a whole spice, often, or grinded can also be.
And is there a different qualities required for these different segments?
Yes, that can be. I mean, normally the retail quality has different requirements concerning density, concerning appearance, concerning visibility, etc. Than when it's an ingredient and used in a mix as an ingredient for a final product. Because in many food products, although spices are the main ingredient, in my opinion, for sure concerning taste, the spice content is only a few percent. So that can be very difficult concerning quality-wise, and also because of the treatment which is done to prepare the final consumer product. When you think of a pizza or something else or whatever where it's used meat, it gets a certain treatment, so the requirements for the ingredients are different than for retail.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to add to that.
Yes.
You just coming back to Paul's presentation and why is it so important when you're talking with the buyer to ask for the technical sheet. It has everything to do with what Paul is saying now. Depending on the use that the spice will have, the technical data will be different. So that's why it's so important to have this exchange and to have clarity. Okay, what is the actual requirement of my buyer? Because it might be completely different if it's going to be used in a mixture for processed food, for chips, which are it's also a big trend, snacks with spice flavor, or if you're going to put it in a bottle and it should have a certain aspect, the quality should be maybe a little bit different. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have a question about the organic segment in spices and herbs. Is the organic, is it still growing or is it stagnant because of the higher prices and maybe economic crisis and the inflation? How do you see that? Is the organic still a growing segment, or is it stabilizing or even?
Well, I think this year in BioFach, the data that was published was that the overall organic market was a little bit stagnated, and it even decreased in some markets due to inflation. This is the last data from last year. That being said, it quite differs depending on the market. For example, in the German market, you had that these big chains that are specialized in organic and that are selling like the most expensive organic products, those decrease their sales. But if you go to the discounter, you see that the sales of organic products are actually growing there. So, it has a lot to do with, of course, the most expensive products are suffering because of economic recession or inflation. But it doesn't mean that the whole organic category is decreasing, and the estimations is anyways that it's going to continue growth. So we do have a little, let's say, stagnation due to inflation, but the perspective is that the organic market is going to continue growing. Now, for spices, I think the growth has been a little bit less strong than in other categories because Paul was saying the percentage is so small that you use in the spices. But I think still the expectation is that it will continue growing. I don't know, gentlemen, if you would like to add something to that.
I'd like to add that also as when I'm correct, in the European Green Deal, there is a commitment that organic production should increase. I'm not sure about, but by 25% or more in the next few years till 2030. So all that means also there is an how do you call it, political support to increase organic production and organic consumption of food.
Okay, thank you. So we have here a question. We just talked about the success and the high demand for capsicum. There's one question: what kind of capsicum is most in demand?
I
Maybe
think.
Pascal?
Yeah, well, I think for the Spanish market, it is mainly the sweet paprika, the sweet. Yeah, I don't know the botanical variety, but I would say approach any of the Spanish importers, and they can tell you exactly what they need. For the hot product, there's a big market in India for extraction and for consumption. And the Indian market is consuming every year more and more because the population is still growing, and it is part of their daily diet. So there's for both type of product good potential in the market.
Okay, thank you.
I've seen also here in the European market the bird eye chili in some presentations, you know, like as a full dried chili to be grinded in you know, in the retail, and also in some snacks. It's being displayed in the packaging as it contains bird eye chili. So I think it is maybe the volumes are not comparable, of course, to the sweet paprika for the Spanish peppers, but there is also an interest of like this type of chili as a specialty, I would say.
I think for the sweet paprika, we are talking about dried product 50 to 60,000 tons, which is, I think, maybe 10 times more than the hot chili, the hot capsicums. So when you talk about demand and opportunities to grow a crop, that is something to be considered. And it can be done in 1 year. You plant, you grow the seedlings, I would say, in October this year. You plant them in the field in January, and by September you can get a crop, depending on, of course, on the country and the climate. So it can be done quickly, and if you make sure you have a customer on the background who takes it, then you can do a big scale production. But if you don't, I would say don't start just growing the product and hoping to find a buyer at the end of the day, because then you can be squeezed. Because if you don't have a buyer, you have to pay the labor for picking, and you might produce something what people don't need at that moment. So try to make a workable contract with a customer who can take it.
Okay, thank
Maybe
you.
some addition to capsicum. Still, the European market is, of course, mainly paprika is the largest volume in my opinion. And when you look at chilies, look at we really appreciate the low heat varieties. So the heat is measured in Scoville heat units. So the big volume in chilies in Europe is between 10,000 and 20,000 Scoville heat units for people who know this. These are the mild varieties of chilies. I mean, when you look at the Indian market, for instance, they really appreciate the really pungent chilies, but they are sold in Europe, but that's a small, very small niche market.
That's very good to know, Paul. Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes left for answering questions. So let's do some more questions, and I'm only gonna tell you, we cannot answer all the questions, but I saw some questions about specific products, for example, cumin and grounded cumin. And so if you go to our website, we have a study on cumin, exporting cumin to Europe, and you'll find all kind of information about the cumin market there. And also saw some questions about moringa. That's part of the natural ingredients sector. So go to our natural ingredients for health products sector to find more on moringa. We have a question: could the intermediary buyers be a good way to enter the European spice markets? Paul. Would you
I don't really understand the question. Who want to enter the market? How do you describe these?
There could be intermediary buyers be a good way to enter the European market. I think it meant that you're not selling directly to the processor, but via an intermediate buyer. Or is that the regular way anyway?
You mean, do they mean a broker? To use a
trader,
broker with contact, or a trader?
It doesn't say here exactly, but yeah, maybe they mean the broker.
Well, they could be part of the value chain. A broker has contacts in certain countries with certain end users, and he might have a good contact in a certain country, or he can speak a language and bridge the gap in the language. A trader is most of the time someone who has money, and with money they can buy and import bigger volumes and bring it in and do distribution in Europe. But for the buyer or the trader, if he's the importer, it still means that the product has to comply to the laws. So they have to do, as first importer, all the checks on quality. And they will be tough on honoring contracts, but also tough on quality, because they will insist that you take back the goods if they don't comply.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a question about the prices for herbs and spices. Yeah, this question is what's the average price per kilo? Of course, that really would depend on the product, but where do they can they get a price reference for what a realistic price is?
The problem with prices is that the prices are never uniform, and there is what I would call a benchmark in the international market. So cumin seeds from Syria, India, Afghanistan, Iran are basically traded all within a certain range, depending on what people need, the cleanliness they can guarantee, what has to be done on arrival. Certain people can do steam sterilized, perfectly clean product from India, and others will bring in the Syrian raw material seeds to be reprocessed in Europe. There is a big difference between those. There could be $1,000 difference in just processing cost per ton. So what is the price? It depends on the quality. Yeah, talk about the buyer. Consider your capabilities and be honest on what you can do. Don't promise what you can't do. If they ask you, can you do a salmonella guarantee, and you don't have a heat treatment system, you cannot give a salmonella guarantee, because salmonella can be caused by a bird flying over, having losing excreta on your product, and it can contaminate the product. So be honest and try to understand how people guarantee a salmonella-free product. And if you don't know it, ask the question, because a question which is not asked is is worse than what you think maybe a stupid question. You can't know it all. Even today, I get questions where I have to say, sorry guys, please explain why are you asking the question, because I don't understand where I have to look for the answer.
Okay, so these benchmarks, Paul, is that publicly available information? Benchmark prices?
No, yeah, you basically need to have an international network with all the suppliers to get an idea what is happening. Yeah, and that is today via internet. It is possible to build up these contacts. In the past, let's say the buyers in Europe, they had the job to find reliable contacts in all the different countries, ask for the prices, and they compared prices and made decisions. People don't easily share prices if you're not doing any business with them.
I think it's also a good idea. Go on, Paul.
Yes. Sorry, Loes. No, in addition to that, so it's a very good question. People have to put a lot more effort into pricing, because it can shift quite easy in spices. When there is a crop failure or something happening, prices can shift within a week, or can sometimes double in 2 weeks. So people have to pay attention to that. It's not like in big commodities as coffee, tea, and soya, whatever, where you have a future market and where you can easily see what's happening on the market. In spices and herbs, you need to pay a lot more attention as a supplier to follow the global market trends. Yes, absolutely. I would say invest in it, pay attention to it, because it's very important.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let's just close with one more question. And yeah, to everyone, sorry if we have not been able to answer your specific question. But there's one question I would like to close with: does the Global Gap certificate for the local farms growing the spice and herbs business considered a competitive advantage in Europe? Maybe Paul or Loes?
Yeah, I think that's better for Paul. You are on the field. Would you say the global gap will be an advantage?
Well, certain countries and certain companies are asking for it, but there are so many. I would say today, so many certificates. I never come across with people who insist on global gap. But if we say we are having an organic certification and a Natural certificate and a food safety system for our business according to the food standard FFSC 22000, they are quiet, because then we know downstream we control our inflow. Global gap is, if I'm correct, more related to activities on farm level, and maybe if you're selling just farm product, ex-farm product, to be reprocessed completely in Europe, like capsicums, global gap might be very important for the buyer, because after that they can organize everything themselves. But I'm on global gap, I'm absolutely not a specialist.
What would you say, Paul, is the certificate for the non-organic segment? Is the certificate that's most required by European buyers?
Well, I think for the European buyers, if you start with a company, you're never certified. So you have to be open on what you do. You have to clip and clear, show your capabilities, and try to make a flow chart of the product and explain in every step what you can do and what you cannot do. And from there, they might give you some support. That is how we started. We received support from people who knew, okay, they're not certified, but they know the main important quality restrictions. And from there, you start up building and training your staff, and eventually you get a food safety certificate. But for example, we had to spend $15,000 on a fence around our building to comply to FFSC 22000, the food defense and food fraud department or section, because you have to make sure that no one can enter your premises and contaminating deliberately your product. You can only do that if your premises are completely closed, and you need a guard and you need a gate, and so that, and who has that money up front when you start? Most of the people, they don't have that money at the beginning. So you have to focus on the product intrinsic quality and explain exactly what you do and what you cannot do, and try to find the supportive customer who will say, okay, I support you in this, but next step, I want you to do this. And they support you long term to give you the let's say, the profit to invest in the next step and next level.
That's
good. You can automatically increase your price when you comply to the new standard. And maybe for new customers, you can try to find a slightly higher price, but the first supporters and the first believers, yeah, you have to honor them for their patience and their hassle to accept your product, because it's not easy to import a product from a company which is not certified. You have to fill in maybe 26 pages of questions what you do, because they need to know and understand the risks. And if you don't do it, they will not start with you unless they know you personally. And that is, I've luck that I've been able to work for 30 years in the international market. I've a lot of international business partners who are personal friends. I know them for maybe 25 years. And if I say I do this and I can do it, they give me the benefit of the doubt. And that is the biggest problem for newcomers in Africa who don't have that network in Europe. They have no natural support. So they have to prove that they can do it. And they have to be modest. They have almost...
So good to close with what you're saying. You have to, as a producer, exporter, you have to be transparent about your production process. You have to build up a relationship with your potential buyers, and via that way you can build trust and together work for a good product, and then ultimately the certification. But that's more often not a starting point, right?
Yeah. Work together.
Work together.
Try to do your own. Work together.
Okay, we are already over time, so let's close this system. I want to thank everyone attending that has attended this webinar. Thank you for that. And again, please visit our website cbi.eu/market information, and you'll get there to the sector spices and herbs. You'll find information about how to find buyers, how to organize your export, and how to export products to Europe. So there are lots of product fact sheets on our website as well. I want to thank the speakers, Paul, Luz, Paul. Thank you for your contribution today. It was very interesting for me as well, and I hope for the audience as well. And I think so, because most of our attendees are still in there. So all the information, including our questions, were very interesting. Thank you all.